Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you so much for coming out to our environmental town hall, where we are going to recap some really big environmental-related pieces of legislation that we did pass in the fall veto session in Springfield. I know many of you. I'm State Representative Lindsey LaPointe. This is my good friend, State Senator Rob Martwick. First of all, thank yourselves for being here tonight. Before we get going, we just want to say a few logistical things and a few thank yous. First and foremost, I want to thank our environmental experts and advocates that are with us tonight, who we are going to hear from. We have the Illinois Environmental Council, which is our umbrella organization of so many amazing environmental organizations in the whole state. We have Citizens Utility Board, aka CUB. We also have Reduce Waste Chicago, which is back at the table. If you're recycling hard to recycle items. And then, of course, we have the Environmental Law and Policy Center, and we have some homegrown constituents who work there, who are here tonight. Thank you for being here. So we are going to get to hear about some really big environmental-related things tonight. And in our role as Rob and I, as state legislators, we do a lot in the neighborhood. We do a lot of constituent services. We do a lot of community outreach, which we're doing tonight. And then, of course, we go to Springfield, and we get to lead and take votes on big bills on lots of issues. And the issue that both he and I care about so much is the environment and climate and all of the things under the umbrella. And we partner really closely with experts and advocates. And sometimes we do really big things, like the big transit bill and the Clean and Reliable Grid Act and the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. And sometimes we do smaller things, like we do bills related to native plants. We did a bill in the spring that changed our state electric vehicle tax credits, which we know has not been easy for everyone. So we're going to get to unpack some of the big things that we just did in Springfield. The other shout out I want to give is to our staff from both Team Martwick and Team LaPointe. Really thank you all. And then our environmental advocacy, our environmental advisory, thank you, council that we have in our office. And it is a group of neighbors who the environment and climate is the thing they care about the most. And rather than me just going to Springfield and talking to advocates and experts, we do this work in collaboration and as a group. And many of them are here tonight. Many of them help plan and execute this event. I'm looking at you. I want to give special shout out to Colin from Portage Park, because he was the impetus for the Environmental Advisory Council by reaching out to me maybe 2 years ago and asking what more can we do on the ground in the community to push better taking care of our environment and doing much better with climate action. Bathrooms are back there and over there. We have 2 sets of bathrooms, and if you parked in the back and haven't hooked up with a parking ticket yet, see Pastor Tana in the back, because we don't want anything bad to happen to your car. Unless you could transit here, in which case you're extra cool. And I'll hand it over to the Senator.
Thank you. Thank you, Lindsey, for taking the lead on this event. Really putting together. It's great to do this. It's really important. You know, I'd like to begin with a little bit of a story. 2013, my first year in the General Assembly, I get a call and I'm visited by my friends at EC, my friends at National Resource Defense Council and the Sierra Club. And I always said, you know, like, people have heard me say this, I consider myself, people say I shouldn't say this, but I'll say it anyway. It's sort of tongue-in-cheek, an armchair environmentalist, meaning I want to do what is good, what is green. I have 2 small children, I want to provide a future for them. I don't always know what that is, right? And hence we rely on people to come and tell us, hey, let's be on the right path. Let's talk about that. Let's figure out the right path. So very early on in my career, I get a visit, and this is 2013. And so I asked my chief of staff, I said, what are we going to talk about? And he said, we're going to talk about fracking. And I said, okay, I don't know what fracking is, right? Now, we all know what fracking is now, but in 2013, I had no idea what fracking was. So I quick look it up, and I see it's this thing, drill it and drop basically a bottom into the earth and blow it up and extract gas and oil and chemicals. And I'm like, oh my God. So they come and sit down and they're like, we're here to talk about fracking. And I said, okay. And they explained it even further. And I said, okay, so we're against that. And they said, well, no, we're actually for it. And I said, what? How are we for it? And they said, oh, well, because we were actually able to negotiate the strictest set of state standards for fracking of any state in the country. And so while we would like to just say fracking shouldn't occur, it's currently occurring completely unregulated and dangerous, and we've been able to negotiate these, right? But again, the point is, we're citizen legislators. How do we know these lessons unless people engage with us, we work with the experts, we work with the advocates, and that helps us learn the right decisions to make as we go forward. Illinois has been incredible to be part of the environmental movement in the Illinois General Assembly because we've led the nation on environmental issues. But that being said, there's so much chaos, not just in our federal government, but with the way the world is changing with technology, that we need to be diligent today and every day going forward so that we can adjust our policies to this ever-adjusting landscape so that Illinois can stay on the forefront of that leadership. And that's really what doing these events is all about. So thank you to everyone that's participating here. Thank you to our constituents who care about this. Thank you to our advocates who help keep us informed and put us on the right path towards a bright environmental future for the next generation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Danny. Yes. There. So I didn't know who the first speaker was. I should have looked at the agenda. Sorry about that. So we're going to bring up Danny from IEC, and he's going to kick it off. Thank you for all the work you do, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Can we just give it one more round of applause to Senator Martwick and LaPointe for one, being so willing to have conversations, listen, and learn from the policy experts, and having done what we call a climate majority in Springfield is why we continue getting some of these big, massive wins on environment. But we know that the work isn't done. Tonight, I'd love to talk to you guys about what we did do this year. And before we get there, my name is Danny Robles. I'm the Legislative Relations Director with the Illinois Municipal Council. We can move to the next slide. I'll tell you a little bit more about my organization. Since 1975, we've been safeguarding Illinois' natural resources, people, plants, and all systems that we all depend on to live. And we do that through advocacy, education, and movement building. We represent over 130 organizations. Citizens Utility Board and Environmental Law Protection Center are two of our lead affiliates, but we also represent organizations that do everything from native gardening to recycling, and organizations that are working on environmental justice issues or energy issues or transportation issues. So we're an ongoing, growing organization, and we work collaboratively with all these organizations to understand issues at hand on all of our issue areas. We cover 6 different issue areas, including agriculture, conservation, zero waste, water, energy, and transportation. And this year we feel like it was a year of climate because of all the things that we accomplished. If we move to the slide, I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about 2 big ones that just got passed last month. And again, I want to thank Senator Martwick and LaPointe for being willing to stay up till 4:30 in the morning, listening to hours and hours of conversation with their colleagues, and being willing to take the votes that were necessary. The 2 bills we're going to talk about are Clean Water Security Act and your Northern Illinois Transit Authority Act, and then I would love to talk a little more about what is the look ahead for 2026. So, Clean Air Affordability Act. The problem at hand is that we are having some high demands on our energy system, And a lot of this is coming from one, high usage, high usage, sorry.
Artificial intelligence.
Yes, artificial intelligence data centers, these, companies that just use a lot of our power. And a lot of what we are struggling against is that with Illinois, we're actually part of two regional transmission organizations that do a lot of interconnectivity. And those regional transmission organizations are 5 years behind in onboarding clean power. Here in Illinois, we made a commitment to be fully renewable clean energy by 2050, and to get there, we have interim steps. And at this moment, we were falling behind. Surja was an important step for us to make some of the changes necessary to ensure that we were creating pathways to bring more of that renewable energy. Additionally, though, we knew that we also needed more flexibility to our grid, and we needed more capacity to make transmission connectivity to ensure that we have the connections. We were just identifying that the items and goals that we put in CEJA, there were still some things lacking. So with Surja, the other thing that we were also combating was the direction that the federal government is currently going. With the new administration, they have doubled back down on fossil fuel and natural gas as a heating source, and we're prioritizing that nationally, which is one of the reasons why we're seeing some of these weird spikes in our electric grid and our the prices. And one of the reasons why we had to double down here in Illinois to ensure that we were putting a plan of action that would allow Illinois agencies, including the Illinois Commerce Commission and the Illinois Power Agency, to make long-term plans that will help keep our grid clean and keep prices low for consumers in the long run. So what was in Surja? One, it promotes stronger investments in our transmission by making sure that we have the capacity to build transmission lines across Illinois to direct some of our clean energy projects. Some of them, downstate, they're building out large solar farms, they're building out large wind turbine farms, and we've got to make sure that we are interconnecting those new loads to the areas where most needed. So urban centers and suburban centers, and also a lot of our rural communities. The other part to this was making sure we made the grid more reliable and sustainable for the long run. And one of the things with renewable energy is if we don't use it in the moment, it gets lost. So one of the things that we can do to ensure that we have additional capacity is building on battery storage. These large battery storage facilities allow us to capture some of the solar and wind power during the hottest days or the windiest days, and keep that and use that for days when we have all the air conditioners running on high capacity, or all the heaters running on high capacity. Those high demand days, this allows us to have a little more of that flexibility. In Surja, we have allowed the state to procure 3 gigawatts of battery storage. 1 gigawatt can help power up to 750,000 homes, and those 3 gigawatts will allow our grid to be more flexible in the long run as we continue building out more renewable energy. The other component to that is this new idea about a virtual power plant that allows consumers who have solar or battery storage already built into their homes to opt into a program that allows them to sell back their power that they're absorbing and help their neighbors around. So it helps us manage a little bit more of that flexibility for the grid in certain areas. The other thing too is it introduces new energy efficiency programs, because the best power that we can have is the power we don't use, and oftentimes we are encouraging people to think about how do they build out more energy efficiency in their homes. And a couple of things is making sure that we don't have leaks in our homes that allow some of our air conditioning to go out or some of our heaters to go out. So we're putting new energy efficiency programs that allow consumers to access weatherization projects, ensure that their homes' envelopes are protected against those leaks, and we don't have to have additional power running throughout the days, and also opting into other programs. And I think especially for folks downstate who have a different grid system and have a different power utility, we were making sure that they have the same kind of capacity to the energy efficiency programs that we do have here in Northern Illinois. So a lot of the conversation was making sure there's parity across the state to ensure that every consumer was able to access that. And some of my colleagues who are going to speak up next will talk a little more, I think, about the energy programs, what data center looks like, and why we are combating against them. So I won't talk too much at length at that. I'll actually transition over to the transit bill. That was one of those that I was closely engaged on this year. And again, one of the reasons why we were digging into this is with transportation being the #1 source of greenhouse gas emissions in Illinois, our partners within the environmental movement are looking for every solution to help reduce the greenhouse gases. And we approach this as a three-pillar approach. We're tackling public transit, we're tackling how we expand zero-emission vehicle infrastructure, and we're also looking at building out a change in how we fund roads to ensure that we are not just building highways, but we're also building other infrastructure that will help people transition to either bikes, walking, or bus rapid transit routes, things that will help move people out of cars and into other modes of transportation. So with that, we knew that this year was an incremental year to ensure that we tackle public transit because we were heading towards a fiscal deficit with our regional transit authority. Likewise, a lot of communities downstate were also facing a lot of issues being able to access transit funds in state through the state legislature. So this bill not only tackles Northern Illinois, but it's a bill that tackles public transit across the state of Illinois. A couple things that we had to combat though during this bill was, we knew that heading into this, our regional transit authority was not meeting the demands of the people in the region. The region including Chicago, Cook County, Lake County, McHenry, Kendall, McCain, and Will County, and DuPage County. So, with the vast majority of people in the state living within these counties, we know that having a robust public transit system is one of the fastest ways we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The problem is, over the last 40 years, RTA has not managed the three under agencies effectively, so those being PACE, Metro, and CTA. I feel like this community is one of the few communities that can say they have all three right in their neighborhood. And I think, looking back at some of the experiences that we brought with our partners, we came down to Jefferson Park Station and just showcased some of these inefficiencies, how Metro and PACE are not communicating effectively on routes and timelines, how there isn't a lot of wayfinding for community members, tourists, people who need support in finding ways to navigate the public transit system. So a lot of these conversations that we had with community members over the course of the last 5 to 10 years helped us identify not only do we need to help fund transit, but a big demand was also we had to reform it. We had to make sure that we can't continue paying into a system that isn't working well. And I think the big piece that we identified was we needed to reform the Regional Transit Authority Act to ensure that there was more collaboration and coordination between the transit agencies. So what this bill did was take a lot of the capital planning, a lot of the service plans, and a lot of the big projects from the agencies and brought it up to a new system called the Northern Illinois Transit Authority Act, Northern Illinois Transit Authority. This new board, VETO, right, in case you guys forget, is going to be active as of June of 2026. So there's still some time for RTA to finish some of the transition. There's going to be a 1-year transition period. We're mandating that IDOT helps with this transition by procuring a consultancy agency that will help deliver the results to ensure that we have the new VETO board in place. What this also does is it condenses the amount of board members that are part of the board to ensure that there's more collaboration and coordination. Those board members are going to be selected by 5 by the governor, 5 by the mayor of the city of Chicago, 5 by the county president, and 1 from each of the Collier County chairs. So in total, will be 20 board members. Of those 20 board members, 17 of those will be part of their sister agencies to ensure that there is coordination and collaboration within PACE, Metro, and CTA as part of the VETO board. And this was something that was asked a lot from our advocates, just knowing that with the silos that existed in the former boards, there wasn't enough conversation on what was needed. And looking ahead of where we're at with Illinois, we know that the way that people move around our region has shifted a lot from the last 40 years, where before we all, like a lot of the businesses were concentrated to the downtown area, we now have moved a lot of business across the region. And what is really needed in this moment is redirection in how we are prioritizing public transit projects. And with this new board, it allows us to have those conversations and coordination with the Department of Transportation that will also help us identify new pathways for buses, especially thinking about the suburbs where a lot of growth has happened in the last 10, 20 years, and we need to shift a lot of the bus lines that currently exist to ensure that we are meeting the new demands as population continues to sprawl out to the suburbs. The other components of this bill that were also addressed was this concern around safety, and we had a lot of conversations around this topic, specifically figuring out what is a functional safety plan that won't put a lot of the funding out of control. So what was decided was there's going to be a new law enforcement task force that will be headed by the Cook County Sheriff, and will bring in Chicago police departments across the region to ensure that, one, they are putting together officers dedicated to public transit, and 2, they're developing a long-term plan of action that the VETO board will decide on how to continue providing support to law enforcement agencies, and also developing a transit ambassador program that is more connected to making sure that mental health resources, substance abuse resources are more available and intervention quicker on the train lines and on the bus lines, and ensuring that we also have navigators that will help customers and riders find the pathway that they need to navigate the transit system. Other pieces to that was also putting an investment in transit-oriented development. And one, I love being in this room because this is a clear example of a good transit-oriented project that prioritizes building out community spaces near public transit lines. And with the investment in transit-oriented development, it allows the new board to engage in procurement plans with municipalities to continue expanding transit-oriented development in their communities, and setting parking minimums to ensure that near transit lines we have more access to storefronts, to community spaces, and other things that will bring more community members to the board. And the other part that I had mentioned earlier is building a stronger relationship with IDOT. IDOT has a couple mandates in this particular bill. One, like I mentioned at the top, is making sure there's a consultant that helps with the transition. But 2, building out a community engagement partner that will help identify pathways across Illinois to ensure that there is more connectivity with buses on the roads across all of Illinois, actually. So not just through the Chicagoland region. And then the other part with the mandate to IDOT is helping downstate transit agencies build better interconnectivity for intercity rail and intercity bus services, something that has been asked by a lot of our downstate partners for many decades. And with this bill, it allows us to start having IDOT take more ownership on that and really put a lot more responsibility in IDOT to be part of the solution of public transit. Like I mentioned, the transition timeline looks like implementation will start July 2026. It's already starting right now. We're starting to have discussions about what are some of the first steps that we need to have with the new transit board, with the long-term vision that we want to have people who are aware of urban planning, who are aware of different needs for transit riders, including people with disabilities, people, new Americans coming to the country, and really putting together a transit system that can be a global reason why people come to our country. I think that's one of our long-term goals, is having a world-class system here in Illinois and in Chicago. We're almost there, but we can do a little bit more. And then to fund this, I do want to talk a little bit more about this, because this was a big part of the conversation that really took us to the end of session to ensure that we got this over the finish line. What was proposed in the final bill is shifting the motor fuel tax to fund public transit. Currently, the motor fuel tax is diverted towards the road fund, so it helps build out some roads. However, right now the road fund has over $3 billion in its coffers, and it's accumulating a lot of interest. So a couple things with that road fund: the interest that is being accumulated right now, $200 million of that interest is going to be diverted to public transit to ensure that we have capital funding to build out new bus stations, train stations, anything that will help support public transit. The shift of the motor fuel tax to public transit, that is directed specifically for operations, so making sure that the bus drivers are being paid, that the train lines are being kept up. So this was the big part of the fiscal cliff that we were heading towards. We were heading towards a $730 million fiscal cliff. What we were able to do is not only cover that $730 million, but we, with the increase in RTL sales tax, that is going to bring another $450 million for operations that will help expand the train services and bus services, and really looking at key areas where we have lost a lot of service in the last 20 years, including the suburbs and the areas in the city where we've lost bus service and train lines in the last 2 decades. And then the final piece that I'll talk about is we stripped the funding formula. There was a statutory funding formula that had existed for the last 4 years that really made it a little bit hard for the RTA to be able to fund operations. And one of the reasons why we had to put this fiscal deficit was 50% of operations had to be funded through the fare box recovery, which is the money we put into the train system. So for every $2 that was spent, $1 had to go be part of operations. And one of the issues with that was when there is a down in ridership, we lose a lot of operations funding, and it's one of the reasons why we have the cycle of losing bus service and train service. Looking back at the 2008-2009 recession, we lost a lot of service during that timeline. Where we were heading towards this fiscal was COVID really put a number on the public transit system, and we were being held up by federal recovery dollars that expired this year, and that's where the gap was existing of $700 million. Near the end, RTA was able to make some changes into their plans, which reduced that gap to $300 million. but we knew that that gap was going to jump back up in 2026, so we needed to fix that now. And a couple of reasons why we need to fix that now, because part of our today's solution was to eliminate wrap and cap services that are very crucial for the disabled community to be able to access transit services in a consistent and fair basis. And for them, losing that service was going to create a lot of turmoil in their movement around the community. And it was one of the highlights that pushed the General Assembly to get this done, basically at the 12th hour on October 31st. Excellent. So what are some of the next steps for transportation? Like I mentioned, we're tackling this in a three-pillar approach. First part is the implementation of VETO. A lot of our organizations within one of our council and Clean Jobs Coalition are moving our direction towards ensuring that we have a good board and keeping eyes on some of the processes that will create community input to ensure that we are bringing that back out to community members. But we're also very well aware that we haven't solved the whole issue with greenhouse gases in the transportation sector. So a couple of things that we are looking to tackle. One, figuring out what are some zero-emission vehicle policies that will help us expand infrastructure that will make reliability on charging easier for community members. We also know that we are facing a lot of federal obstacles with zero-emission vehicles, so that is one of the things that we're looking to figure out how do we take that into effect here in Illinois. And then making sure that we set a greenhouse gas target goal in the transportation sector. Some of our peer states like Colorado and Minnesota have already accomplished this and have helped create climate index scores in their departments of transportation that help them prioritize projects that reduce greenhouse gases and aren't just highway expansion, but they're thinking about how do we use multiple modes of transportation on the roads. So that's part of what we're looking to build out next year. But as far as other environmental policies, we'd love to talk a little bit more about those because we're really excited to continue moving in the momentum we took. This year, not only did we pass the Clean Reliable Grid Act and the Northern Illinois Transit Authority Act, we also passed a bill that will help eliminate PFAS in some of the products in state. We passed a bill that will help build a task force that will analyze how climate displacement will affect Illinois and what things our agencies should be prepared. But we know that the work isn't done. We have more to do. So a couple of the bills that I'll name out is we got really close this year to passing a ban on polystyrene foam. So those white plastic containers that you receive at restaurants. Our long-term goal is to phase those out here in Illinois and ensure that some of the worst plastic polluters are now no longer part of our system. And we also have other plastic reduction bills. A couple of those will be ensuring that you only get plastic utensils when you ask for them in restaurants, and also looking at replicating what other states have done around plastic bags to ensure that we have less plastic in our systems. And as far as transportation and energy, I should mention energy at the bottom of that. Looking to regulate data centers, and some of my kids are going to talk a little more about what that looks like. But we're also looking to advance bike protections through education and other levers that will help people transition over to bikes if they're looking to do that in their communities. And the zero emission vehicle support that we're expanding. On agriculture, we're looking at controlling a little bit of how concentrated animal feeding operations or CAFOs are leading some pollutants into our farmlands and our communities' airs downstate. On conservation, we have a big issue around water protections. The Supreme Court last 2 years ago passed a ruling that eliminates wetland protections across the country, and Illinois doesn't have its own set of rules, so that is one of the things that we're looking to advance, and I think this past week there was an additional ruling through the Trump administration that further erodes a lot of those protections. So I think this is going to be one of our top priorities next year, is making sure that we have wetland protection. One, because wetlands help mitigate floods, and two, Illinois has already lost 90% of its wetlands thanks to farmland and other developments in the state. And finally, we need to protect our waters. There's a lot of emerging contaminants that we're identifying. So I think a couple of those things is we need to build out our PFAS bill to make sure that we are having all of the components of polyfluoroalkyl substances. PFAS. It's hard to remember. And ensure that we're protecting our water funds to ensure that we have long-term drinking water for our communities. And then finally, around environmental justice is advancing our air permitting bill to ensure that environmental justice communities have the tools that they need to define their communities, have protections against new development and industries coming into their homes, and ensuring that we have a way to identify environmental justice communities as they develop throughout the state. So we've accomplished a lot this year. We're looking for a few more things next year, and we're going to continue moving the momentum. And I think with that, I just want to thank you. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Carson and Martwick. And thank you for your questions.
Thank you, Danny, IEC, my colleagues at CUB, LaPointe, for all your hard work on this legislation. These bills that Danny talked about are big deals, hard to pass bills. These are great bills. So I just want to say thanks to everyone who engaged, contacted their legislatures, and just for showing up here tonight. Yes, I'm Carson. I work at the Environmental Law and Policy Center. We are a nonprofit based here in Chicago that advocates for environmental protection across the Midwest through both law and policy. So I work with courts. I'm a clean energy media relations specialist, so I do a lot of communications about clean energy. So while there is a lot of to discuss when it comes to water, land use, and some other things with data centers, and I will do what I can to touch on those. It will be primarily focused on electricity and clean energy. So, yeah, so I'm here to talk about data centers. It's the hot topic, as Danny introduced when we talked about the Clean and Reliable Grid Act. A lot of these issues that we're encountering in the electricity industry, whether it be increasing the bills, I'm sure everyone is familiar with that. Reliability, that's not an issue yet, but people are starting to, kind of express some concern about reliability issues within the next couple of years because of the demand that these data centers are bringing on the grid. Anyway, so here's what I plan to talk about in my time, just sort of level set. What are data centers? I think touching on the scale is important. We all know that they use a lot of water and a lot of electricity, but it's kind of difficult to wrap your head around it. So I want to talk about that, where they're showing up, again, sort of give some perspective on the scale, how much electricity are we using, how does that impact our energy system, and how are we impacted here in Chicago, what can folks do? So to give some context, this is our historic electricity use in the nation. You can see starting about 20 years ago, it's leveled off. So we haven't experienced growth in electricity demand in decades. This is not because demand stopped increasing, but it's because there were improvements in efficiency, and there weren't any drastic increases in demand. mostly, improvements to efficiency, the system sort of reached the status quo. And this is where we are now. This is a very sudden and very stark change. And as you can see, they're both, I'm just going to grab this. They're both high scenarios, low scenarios. And you might be asking, how is there such a spectrum in what we can expect? And it's because we don't know how much electricity these data centers are going to use. There are so many that are lined up in the queue for electricity. It's a huge question mark on how many of these are legitimate, how many of these are going to be built. A lot of data centers we know are sort of shopping around, so they're knocking on the door of ComEd. They're also knocking on the door in Michigan saying, hey, can we plug into your grid? So it's really hard to know how much of this is going to materialize. And grid planning and electricity planning, utility planning, is really hard, and it takes a really long time to build these massive transmission lines, build power plants to address this demand. So it's a really tricky spot to both figure out how much demand is really going to materialize, how do we plan for that, how do we do so while keeping electricity prices stable and without threatening grid reliability? We need to keep the lights on at the end of the day. So there are three main challenges that this data center growth brings. And the first, and I think the most noticeable that people are talking about, is electricity prices are going up. And without getting too into the technical weeds here, there was a capacity auction in PJM, which is the controller of the regional grid that Chicago is in. And this auction is to secure emergency reserves, emergency power. So states utilities bid into this auction to purchase electricity, make sure that we have reserves in case of reliability issues. We've got these reserves ready to go. This is what's getting so crazy expensive. We're sort of at the early stage of this growth. People know it's happening, we haven't seen the full impact of it yet. So where we're seeing this is an exponential increase in costs when it comes to these capacity prices. So it's the emergency reserve power is getting really, really expensive. Obviously, your electricity bills aren't increasing exponentially like that, but there are parts of them that are. So it's, I think Hub might talk about this a little bit, but the supply portion of your bill increased around 10% probably, and there are more increases that are expected down the line. So there's been a lot of discussion, finger pointing, like who's responsible for these bill increases, why is this happening? And it seems like the primary reason, or not it seems, it's been determined the primary reason, not the only reason, the primary reason, is the data center demand that is coming to the grid, and there's such high demand for electricity, and when it comes to economics, when demand is up and supply is not catching up with demand, prices go up. So that's where we are today, and when our electricity bills are increasing, we are effectively subsidizing these data centers in an industry with some of the wealthiest and most powerful companies in the world. So that is an issue that we need to address and work on. So challenge number 2, and this has to do with costs as well. Your bills don't only pay for the electrons that power your home. You pay for the supply, but you also pay for the infrastructure. So, poles and wires, transmission lines, things that connect these data centers to the grid. And these data centers are big. They need a lot of electricity, and some of them even require transmission lines, a single transmission line that can be built to power one data center. Historically speaking, infrastructure like transmission lines are socialized costs because theoretically everyone benefits. You know, we're all using an equal share of the system, so we all split these costs equally, maybe socialize them. What's happening now, and what happened in 2024, is because we didn't have updated rules yet, there were transmission lines built to serve individual data centers that we are not benefiting from. So this model of we all share the costs doesn't apply anymore because we're building transmission lines, over $4 billion worth of transmission lines throughout the region that are serving just data centers, but we're all splitting those costs. So there's rulemaking that needs to be updated and adjusted to account for that. Next slide, please. Okay. Number 3, third challenge is this growth in demand complicates clean energy projects. When, you know, you need to build much more electricity infrastructure, it's already challenging enough to keep up with clean energy goals. It's hard to build, it's hard to find places to build clean energy infrastructure that everyone agrees on, you know, it takes time. So what's tricky, and in Illinois specifically, is our clean energy goals are tied to the total amount of demand, or the total amount of electricity that's on the grid. It's proportional. So if we double the total amount of electricity that we are putting onto the grid because of these data centers, we also need to then double the amount of clean energy that we are building and getting on the grid at the same time. That's challenging, and what we're seeing as a trend is utilities are turning to power plants that were set to retire. So we're seeing coal plants that are staying open past their retirement. We're seeing a lot of interest in building gas plants. We're seeing a lot of interest in nuclear as well. So it complicates this clean energy progress. Are we going to keep making progress towards our goals, or are we going to fall back for long coal plant retirements? So those are the main key problems that we're trying to address here. So I don't want to paint, you know, a dark picture. It's challenging. It's new. It's different. But there's also a lot of opportunity that can accompany this too. I mean, these companies that are building these data centers all have pretty ambitious climate goals. So, you know, we're talking about Meta, we're talking about Google, Amazon. You see their goals are net zero by 2030, power research and carbon-free energy by 2030, Amazon climate pledge by 2040. So it doesn't fit into their plans to fall back on coal or to build new gas. So we need to keep in mind that these companies are so wealthy, they have so many resources, they have so much power that we can almost harness that. If we can set up the right guardrails and incentives and the right carrots and sticks for these mega rich companies, it's possible to power progress towards our clean energy goals. It doesn't have to just detract. So that's the challenge that we're trying to achieve here, is how can we set up a system of incentives and guardrails, like I said, to make sure that we are using the resources of these mega companies to A, protect customers. We shouldn't be paying for private data center infrastructure. 2, minimize air and water pollution. Again, I'm talking mostly about air pollution because we're leaning on these coal plants. You know, a lot of them were set to retire, so they've deferred maintenance. You know, they're not up to date. They're not the cleanest, best power plants ever. They're old. They're stumbling to the finish line. You know, it's not good for clean air. Water use is also a big issue here. Again, I'm not as much of an expert on that, but just in the same scale of electricity that they use a lot of water, and that's why we're seeing them in the Midwest. You know, you've got a lot of fresh water, a lot of flat land. It's perfect for building these monster warehouses. So, second goal, minimize the air and water pollution that comes from the data centers. And 3, maintain the energy product. So, this I'll just kind of skim over. We're obviously in Chicago and Illinois here, but just some more context of the ELPC. You know, we're engaged in all these Midwest states, and to paint a picture, I guess, of the status of these rulemakings and regulations around data centers. These states are the ones currently reviewing their regulations, whether it be in the legislature or in front of the regulators, the commission. So we can do next slide. Okay. So how do we crack this issue? We don't want to create an environment that's strictly punitive, where you're mandating something that you can only build in Illinois if you power with clean energy. Like, that would be great, but we don't really see that as realistic. We need to, again, go back to those carrots and sticks. Like, these data centers, like it or not, they're going to get built. We'll see just how many, but they're coming if you like it or not. So there are pragmatic solutions that we are advocating for and that we think are the right path forward. And this main idea is to incentivize them, these data centers, to bring their own new energy to the table. So if you want to build a data center in Illinois, you have to build the infrastructure that will power that, because individual customers should not be paying for the power infrastructure of big tech. So how do you do that? Again, you can't really mandate it, but what do these companies want is a big question. How can we help them? How can we get a win-win here? These companies don't really care about cost. They're so wealthy there, obviously. Money is not an object. They don't care about that. They care about speed to grid. Like, this is an arms race for them. They want to get their data centers plugged in as quickly as possible, faster than the competition. So that gives us, in our view, an opportunity to leverage that. And we can reward companies that come to the table with new clean energy, with transparency, with good, I'm not a water expert, but good water policy. We can reward that. We say, well, if you bring all this to the table, you pay for your infrastructure, you pay for your own clean energy, you give us a plan of how it's going to help Illinois meet its goals, then you get speed grid, you get to plug in first. And we see that as a win-win situation where the state gets to harness the resources and the capital of these companies. They get what they want in speed to grid. You get to plug in first, you get that competitive advantage over the other tech companies. And part of that, again, we don't have to get too wonky here, but flexibility is a big piece of this too. It's not just bring more energy, but are you playing nice in the sandbox? On those hot summer days when everyone's cranking their AC, are you down to be flexible? Like, can you cut back a little bit? You don't need all of that electricity all the time. So part of this is, if you come to the table with a good plan of we're going to pay for this infrastructure, here's our plan when it comes to clean energy, how we're going to power our operations, and here's our plan when it comes to flexibility. For example, we'll build a gigawatt of battery storage. That's amazing because on days when it's peak demand, prices are high, they can just tap into that storage and say, don't worry, we've got our own power on reserve. Everyone else is at the grid's fine. So that's the model that ELPC and our colleagues as well are working together on and pitching. I know IEC is working on this in the legislature, as are other groups too, and it's this, you may have heard the analogy or the acronym Beyonce, bring your own new clean energy. Beyonce. More or less, like, that's what we're asking them to do. Bring your own. It's enough of a free ride on the system, but we need to set those rules first, and that's the big challenge. So, questions I realize will be at the end, and then just more context. So we just passed this big, bill, FERJA, when it comes to electricity. That mandates a lot of, funds a lot of energy storage. We talked about this virtual power plant. That's a great example of flexibility. So we're all working together on those high demand days to make sure that we're being flexible, we're adapting, we're sharing resources, no one's hogging it. That keeps prices down. Prices are most expensive when everybody needs electricity. That's when prices go up. So it's the peak demand days that we want to avoid. And that's again why flexibility. So there are two sort of venues where this rulemaking can take place. There is Springfield, the legislature, where we just passed SERJA. And as Danny mentioned, looking forward to next year, people are also eyeing data center regulation. So a bill that might set the stage to encourage this bring your own energy approach. That's one way that you can do it. Another, and this is a little more where ELPC is focused, is with the Illinois Commerce Commission, or the ICC. They are the ones who handle they regulate utilities, they regulate ComEd. So they sort of set the rules for ComEd. And we are pushing in front of the ICC for this bring your own model. And again, it's not a rule, it's not a mandate, it's a help us, help you, everybody wins. We view it as that kind of solution. And then just one last fact that I think is just an interesting perspective setter on all this, when it comes to scale, how much electricity are we dealing with. ComEd's current capacity, so what they have the ability to serve, what their system currently serves, is 24 gigawatts. That's a lot. A gigawatt is a million homes, more or less, roughly. The amount of demand that is in ComEd's queue, so all the data centers lined up in the queue trying to get power, that currently amounts to 28 gigawatts. So the amount of electricity that these data centers want is more than the system currently provides for the entire city. It's 100, and I don't know the math, but it's more. It's so much. But again, take this with a grain of salt. You don't know how much it's going to materialize. A lot of these data centers are shopping around. It's also just, that's not feasible, so that's not going to happen. But I hope that was a helpful sort of lay of the land, and that's what the LPC is working towards. And I think this bring your own model is we're pushing in Illinois, and a lot of other states are doing too. So we should hear from the Illinois Commerce Commission in January of are they going to set these rules for data centers trying to plug into the grid. And if we don't quite get everything that we wanted, we're sort of waiting and seeing how that goes before potential legislation in the spring. So that, introducing a bill to plug any gaps that the Illinois Commerce Commission does not address. And when it comes to how do we engage, what can we do, I think just being informed, being engaged is huge. Just being here, I think you all saw, you can make a difference. We passed SERJA, we passed veto, thanks to people being engaged, reading these emails, subscribing to IECs and post email lists. When you get an action alert, contact your legislator, write an LTD, talk to your legislators, just tell them what you care about because they're listening, and talk to each other, and just stay engaged. And I guess with that, We'll do questions at the end, and I will pass it off to Citizens Utility Board and to Matt. Thank you very much.
All right, hey friends, how's it going? So great to see so many of you. Big shout out to Karsten. That is not an easy topic to cover. Capacity options are so wonky, and you did a great job. So, my name is Matt. I work with CUB, or the Citizens Utility Board. By show of hands, how many folks are familiar with CUB? Look at that. That's great. That's a lot of CUB friends right there. For those who don't know who we are, need a refresher, we're a nonprofit organization. We fight the utility companies on your behalf as ratepayers. So essentially, whenever the utility companies attempt to raise their rates or pass some legislation that's not very consumer friendly, we're the group that goes after them on your behalf, ratepayers. A couple things. I won't spend too much time on this slide, but we do have a hotline, 1-800-669-5556. So if you ever have a question about your utility bills, really anything from I'm facing a disconnection or somebody I know is facing a disconnection, what do I do? I was approached by a solar salesman, and I'm not sure if this is a big deal or not. Hit us up. We're so happy to talk, and if we don't know the answer, we're going to know somebody who does know the answer, so we can get you in contact with a different organization. Spend a lot of time in places like this with folks like yourselves. So we have the citizensutilityboard.org website, which has our calendar. So if you're interested in checking out some of our other programming, or you have a friend or a neighbor who could benefit from some of these services, send them to our calendar, and we can see what we can do for them. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So today I'm going to talk about how we can reduce our energy burdens in our home. And I think this is especially important because we're at a time where energy prices are at an all-time high. So electricity rates right now are 47% higher than they were last year, which I know most folks have heard some moans and groans, and I know folks are definitely feeling that. This is due to the capacity options that Karsten was mentioning that are tied to the data center load. And then on top of that, if you look at the other side of the coin, we're also experiencing really high fixed charges on our natural gas bills. So in 2023, the gas utilities collectively raised their rates by $583 million. The thing to note about rate hikes is when they happen, they don't just happen for a year. It's not like they get this money, they spend the money, and then it falls off our bill. These rate hikes happen in perpetuity, so they tend to stack. We've seen them as year after year, hundreds of millions of dollars go into these utilities. Just yesterday, the Commerce Commission approved a rate hike for Nicor, which is the suburban utility for gas, and then Ameren, which is our downstate utility for gas, and they received $240 million. Big number. We were able to cut that down. CUB and some of our friends at ELPC and EDF and a bunch of other friends worked on this to try to fight down that rate hike, and we got it down by about 47%, but they still got $240 million. It's a lot of money. It's nothing to sneeze at. And unfortunately for Chicagoans, People's Gas is expected to file a rate hike January 2026. So we're at a point in time where both electricity and gas bills are rising. A lot of smart folks are working on this stuff to try to create protections for Illinoisans, like with the data center stuff. Different groups are trying to fight these rate hikes. So that's why I want to focus on some things that we can do in our home while we have some folks in those smoke-filled rooms, so to speak, advocating on our behalf. And then there's some things that we can do in our homes to reduce our energy burden, whether it's storing. So the first thing I like to talk about is energy efficiency. In my mind, energy efficiency is the unsung hero of cost reduction and carbon reduction. It is the least sexy thing I'm going to talk about today, but I promise it is very, very important. We have a mantra at the CUB office, and it's that the cheapest and cleanest energy is the energy you don't use. And that doesn't mean live by candlelight. That just means using energy more efficiently. Our friends at the Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC, did a study a few years ago that found that every dollar you spend on energy efficiency, you end up getting $3 back in energy savings. It's a really good investment to make in your home. And a lot of this stuff can be low to no costs. So what can you do right now? I think weatherization is one of the best places to start. It's one of the easiest places to start. I do not wear a tool belt in my home, to my wife's chagrin. I am not the handiest person. And I was able to, I went on YouTube and I typed DIY weatherization. A bunch of tutorials came up, and I was able to follow those tutorials, run to the store, get the things I needed, and then install them within the afternoon. And there was a notable difference. Stuff like weather stripping, caulking your baseboards, those kinds of things make a really big difference, because if you have any gaps in your home and the energy is leaking out of your home, well, your furnace or your air conditioner is going to keep running to meet that demand, right? But if you can seal those, it makes a pretty big difference in your home. So I always tell folks, if you have access to the internet, Go on YouTube, go on Google, search DIY, do-it-yourself weatherization, and that can make a really big difference. A lot of cool stuff you can do. If you have any financial wiggle room, it's in your interest to look into something called an energy audit. An energy audit is when you contract, or you work with a contractor who comes to your home and does a litany of different tests. They do some building science stuff, where they see where the inefficiencies are in your home, and they can help you identify the kinds of projects that you need to do to best create a good building envelope. This picture here is actually from a Cub volunteer, Kathy, shout out Kathy. She's in Naperville, and she's electrifying her home. Before she started her electrification journey, she decided to get an energy audit. And she took a photo of her contractor doing something called a blower door test. What this is doing is it's sucking the air out of the home, and then the contractors monitor the airflow to determine where the leaks are happening. So they do a lot of cool stuff. They can take infrared photos of your home to see where the energy is leaking. Really important stuff. So instead of doing what I did, which was throwing a bunch of stuff at a wall, seeing what sticks, you can pinpoint the inefficiencies of your home and spend money in projects that are going to make the biggest difference. No shame in throwing some stuff at a wall. Sometimes you got to do that. But again, if you do have some financial wiggle room, it could be in your best interest to look into an energy audit. Typically, they cost a couple $100. This bit.ly/energy audit DOE, kind of rhymes there. That link will take you to the Department of Energy's energy audit resource. They have a lot of good resources on that webpage about what to expect from an energy audit, questions to ask your contractor, and then they also have some contractor lists you can play with as well. Lastly, we have some programs through our utility. So if you've already done a lot of this work, your home's in good shape, and you're not sure where to go next, it's in your best interest to look at the programs that are available through your utility. We'll spend some time talking about those. Next slide, please. So this one is hourly pricing. This is what we're going to start with. This looks kind of wonky, but I'm going to make sense of this. So hourly pricing is a demand response program through ComEd. And this changes the way that you pay for electricity. So traditionally, the way that we pay, or what we pay, is an average of what you're seeing on the screen. So our energy prices actually change hour to hour based on things like demand. And I took this from the summer, July 21st, and you can see it's color-coded, which is kind of nice, makes it easy. Green is good, orange is moving into bad, and red is bad. And on July 21st, everything was pretty good. The highest it got was at about 5 p.m., and it got to 6 cents and some change. When the going default rate for ComEd at the time was 10 cents per kilowatt hour, so about 4 cents less than what ComEd was charging. So the whole day was really good, and there's even a point of time around 3 p.m. where there was no bar. Disappeared, right? It was 0 cents per kilowatt hour. So if you had an electric vehicle, for example, and you were charging at 3 p.m., you wouldn't be charged for that energy consumption. It's pretty cool. It keeps a running tally of what you're using in the home. In some cases, it'll go into the negatives, and if you're using energy when it's in the negatives, you're getting a credit. The idea of this program is that you move your energy usage. Big ticket stuff is the most important, so like laundry, dishes, charging an electric vehicle. You move those to the valleys and avoid the peaks. There are definitely peaks. Next slide, please. So this is from a few weeks earlier. This is from July 15th, and we see some red, right? The red gets up to 26 cents per kilowatt hour. And again, the going rate for electricity at that time was 10 cents. So if you charged your electric vehicle on July 15th at 6 p.m., you're going to rack up a big tally. It's more than double what ComEd's rate was at the time. However, if you look at like 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. or even 8 p.m., the rate falls precipitously, drastically. Go with that. It goes back down to like 5, 6 cents. So the idea of this program is that you move your usage outside of those peaks into those valleys, and even on days when we're seeing really high demand, you can still find savings if you use this program in a clever way, if you start to move your usage outside of that. It's good for your pocketbook. You can save some money if you're able to move your usage around, but it's also good for the environment. So when you see moments like this, when we have high demand, generally speaking, we have to turn on these things called peaker plants, which are really, really expensive and really, really dirty power plants. And we turn them on a handful of times a year in order to meet demand when we have days like this. Ideally, we don't turn those on from a cost perspective, from an environmental perspective. Ideally, folks like us in this room would just use outside of those peaks, right? We tapped into a program like this, and then we would see, oh my God, it's double. let's just do the dishes at 8 p.m. And when you do that, you can save some money and then you can reduce the reliability on those heater points. Next slide, please. So this is a program through ComEd, so they give you a monthly snapshot every month. So if you do sign up for it, you can kind of keep a ledger of how you're doing. They'll give you total savings. They'll show you what your bill would have been if you were with ComEd's default structure. They show you what you paid through hourly pricing, and then they give you total savings. The cool thing about this program is that if you find that you're not saving energy, because it is risk and reward, if you end up using energy during those peak times, predominantly when you're on hourly pricing, you're going to have a higher bill. But fortunately, they're going to send you this recap that you can determine if you're saving or losing. You can even go into your ComEd account online and pull a fun spreadsheet that shows green and red. The green months mean you saved money, red months mean you lost money. So you're kind of playing the long game. Some months you might lose money on this program. Sometimes we have really crazy demand months where something weird happens, like a crazy winter storm perhaps. And that can offset some of the usage here. So there might be some months where it's not so great. But if you're looking at the year-long perspective and you're saving, you should stick around on the program. Slide, please. So there's a sister program to hourly pricing called Peak Time Savings. Everybody in this room should be on Peak Time Savings. It is all carrot, no stick. So the way this works, and I pulled this from July 29th, they had an event. When we see those days where we have those peaks, generally speaking, they're going to call an event. They send an email, a text message, they give you a ring too, and they say, hey, Ms. Smith, from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m., use less than you typically would. And if you do, you get about $1 per kilowatt hour that you saved or reduced. If you don't, nothing happens. All good. All carrot, no stick. You can be on hourly pricing and peak time savings at the same time. But you can just be on peak time savings. If you're not ready to commit to something like hourly pricing, all good. Peak time savings is just a good way to be aware of when we're seeing those really peaky days and when we're starting to use those peaker plants. You can move your usage outside of that window. You can save a couple bucks. It's not going to be night and day on your bill, but it's still, again, a good way to just be aware of those things. And then if enough people are doing this, perhaps we'll not need to rely on those peaker plants moving forward in the future. Next slide, please. So the last program I want to talk about is the Free Home Energy Assessment. This is through ComEd, NICOR, and People's Gas. It's a joint program for the utilities. There are 3 different kinds of assessments that you can tap into. They're all free. You have in-home assessments, you have virtual assessments. Those are both income qualified, so it's 80% of the area median income. I'll show you what that looks like in the slide here. But they are income qualified. The in-home assessments, the contractor will come out that works with the utility. They'll do a very general level assessment of your home. They'll give you a report saying, here's where you're doing good, here's where you could have some improvement. But the best part is they give you a bunch of free stuff. They give you LED light bulbs in every fixture you don't already have them, low flow shower heads, faucet aerators, pipe insulation. They can even give you a programmable thermostat. It's pretty fun. So they determine what your home needs or what your home would benefit the most from, and they'll install that for you day up. If you don't feel comfortable with having somebody come into your home, it's all good because they have a virtual assessment. So if you have access to a smartphone or a tablet, and you can like walk them around with a little camera, they can do the virtual assessment and just send you these appliances in the mail so you can install them on your own. Again, these 2 are they're income qualified. The slide will show you what that looks like. The last one is a self-assessment. So if you are above the income qualifications, you can fill out essentially a survey online. They'll determine what appliances make the most sense based on your feedback from that survey, and they'll send you those appliances. So this is just a really good way to get some light bulbs, right? Get some free LEDs. You're paying for it. You might as well take advantage of it. This stuff is funded on your bill. So next slide, please. This fun-looking chart is an area median income chart. This is based on how many folks are in your home, and it's geographically based. So Chicago is going to have a higher AMI than our friends downstate, for example. So for a household of 4, I don't want to get in the way, so I'll just kind of try to point it out here. So a household of 4 at 80% AMI is about $96,000, or just shy of that. So traditionally, we've used federal poverty level to dictate who gets access to these kinds of programs, but we've been moving to something called 80% AMI because it's a little more indicative of the working class and includes more folks in these programs. So if you're in a household of 4, you're making just shy of $96,000 or less, you can tap into those first 2 assessments. If you're making more than that, you just do the self-assessment. Next slide, please. I forgot about the rebates. So there are a lot of really good rebates out there. I pulled like just a handful of ones that I thought were cool, but there are even more than what's on this slide here. For example, I'll highlight the bottom three. If you're somebody who's interested in electrifying your home and looking at an all-electric alternative to a furnace, there's $2,000 available for a ducted air source heat pump. There's about $1,000 available for a mini split system. There's $6,000 available for a geothermal heat pump system. Nothing to sneeze at. That's some serious money that can really help maybe, move you from one appliance over to the other. So if you're in the business of needing to switch out an appliance, a stove, a furnace, go on their website. I have this bit.ly link that you can check out now, but if you just go on ComEd's website, you can search for rebates and you can find the list of all those rebates up there. Next slide, please. All right, solar. Let's talk about solar. Illinois is a really good state for solar. We have some really stellar programs, really robust programs to help folks tap into solar energy. There's also a federal program that is ending this year, which is really sad. So we'll start at the top. There was a federal tax credit where you can deduct 30% of the total cost of your solar installation on your taxes. Unfortunately, hence my little sad face up there, it's going away. And if you haven't gotten your ducks in a row already, chances are you're not going to be able to tap into it. I think a lot of the solar installers we were talking to were like booked in the summer once folks learned that this tax credit was going away. There's a lot of moving pieces that you need to get set up in order to get this tax credit. So unfortunately, that tax credit is going away, but this is not the first time. So this tax credit has been revived a couple times in Congress. So fingers crossed, hopefully in a couple of years we'll be able to bring that back. But fortunately, here in Illinois, again, we have a ton of really good programs that still make solar a really good deal. So there's some state incentives, specifically the Solar Renewable Energy Credit, or SREC. Some folks were shouting out the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, Future Energy Jobs Act. Those bills helped set up this credit. This is where you would sell the environmental value of your solar panels back to the state. And it's based on how much your system is expected to generate over 15 years. They have a little bit of an equation set up for that. And with that, it covers about 30% of the total cost of your installation. And you are helping Illinois meet their clean energy goals, or your clean energy goals. Illinois is required to procure a certain amount of our energy generation from renewable energy. It's going up every year. And part of that slice of pie needs to come from folks in this room. So it's distributed generation. You get a piece of the pie in some cases, which I think is pretty cool. Because to wax philosophical for a second, when I think of a coal power plant or natural gas power plant, I don't feel like I have any ownership in that. Whereas with solar, you can have some ownership in the way that we procure this energy. You can help meet the clean energy goals. You get paid for it. It's pretty cool. Lastly, we have some good utility incentives as well. We are a net metered state, meaning that when you overproduce energy, you spit that back out on the grid. Most systems here are grid tied, meaning that you're going to pull energy from the grid and your solar panels. But let's say you're at church, you're at work, your solar panels are working, the sun is shining on them, it is running through your home, but your appliances aren't on to harvest that energy. It's just going to go back out to the grid. And the way our policy works here is that you are credited for that energy that goes out into the grid on the supply portion of your bill. It's called net metering, which is pretty cool. It helps reduce your bills with solar. You can zero out your bills. And fully zero, you still have to pay taxes and fees, but zeroes out parts of your usage. There's also a utility rebate of $300 per kilowatt, which might not mean a whole lot to folks here, but to kind of paint a general picture, and this is very back of the envelope. Solar system sizes vary significantly household to household. But generally, 6.5 kilowatts is like what you would see for an average sized house, and that comes out to just shy of $2,000. So there's some good money when you start to stack these programs together. It can significantly reduce the cost of the installation. Next slide, please. So this takes me to community solar. Community solar is a very good program for folks who can't put solar on their rooftops. If you're a renter, you're a condo owner without roof rights, don't have your ducks in a row to do it right now, you just don't want to do it, but you still want to see some kind of cost savings, or you want to tap into some clean energy here in Illinois, this is a good program for you. The way this works is you would subscribe to a solar farm somewhere in your utility territory. Next slide, please. And that subscription would be based on your average electricity usage. And then each month your community solar farm produces energy on your behalf, they report that to the utility. And then the utility then applies a credit to your bill. And right now, the current offerings are anywhere from 10 to 20% guaranteed on the supply portion of your bill. Next slide, please. I'm going to do a little time check here. Ooh, we are running out of time. Actually, this is what it looks like on your bill, but I actually have some fact sheets in the back at Rep. LaPointe's table back there where we have a general breakdown of what this looks like. But it's applied to your bill. You can see some pretty good savings in the program. Next slide, please. Last program I do want to mention is Illinois Solar for All, or ILSLA for short. This is Illinois' income qualified solar program. They have it for both community solar and rooftop solar. The way it works is no money down, guaranteed 50% savings. And they have it again both for community solar and rooftop solar. So the way it would look with community solar is instead of that 10 to 20% savings, you would have a guaranteed 50% savings on the supply portion of your bill. The same is true for rooftop solar. They can put panels on your rooftop for free, and they would set up something called a power purchase agreement where you are buying energy from the panels on your rooftop, but at a 50% reduction. It's pretty neat. It uses that magic 80% AMI number, so again, for a household of 4, you need to make just shy of $96,000. Next slide, please. So the last point I want to make, and Karsten mentioned this a little bit, is I think it's important to get engaged. And you guys are already doing that. You're in this space on a Thursday evening. It's like we're pushing an hour and a half. You're hanging out. You're listening to what we have to say. And that is an important first step. We're going to need a lot of grassroots support when we're looking at data centers. We're going up against companies like Meta, Google, Amazon. So participating in spaces like this one, staying engaged with organizations like IEC, ELPC, Hub is going to be really helpful for us and also for yourself to help us get these policies across the finish line. I have some shameless self-promotion. We are working on a campaign called Consumers for a Better Grid. Big shout out to my colleague Clara. She's out east working at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and PJM to advocate for us to have better policies at PJM. So if you're interested in learning more about that, forabettergrid.org. For a getter grid, it's better, not getter. Yeah, you guys can picture forabettergrid.org. You can go to our website and find it there too. She has a lot of information and webinars housed there, as well as petitions that you can sign. And then lastly, we have our website again, our social media handles at Hub Illinois. We do a lot of petitioning online. We again have an events calendar where we're going to be at certain points of the year. So stay engaged, stay tuned. We need your help to do this kind of stuff. And we're working really hard on it. So that is a wrap for me. Appreciate y'all's time. I think we're going to do some questions maybe. I know we're kind of pressed, but.
Okay, before we go to questions, just because we're running a little late and I want to respect everyone's time, I wanted to let our lovely hosts talk about their space really quickly and this really great fundraising opportunity they're doing to continue to grow a lovely Friendship community.
Thank you. My name is Shauna Bowman. I'm the executive director here at Friendship Community Place, and I also pastor the church, Friendship Presbyterian Church, that worships here. I do think I'd love to tell you, since you all care about this, this is a LEED certified building. It's gold certified, and won the award in 2023 for the environmental commitments that were made when it was designed. So we're excited to partner with the owner-operator Full Circles Communities that received that award. Here at Friendship, we are a community hub. We have a pollinator garden in the back. We have a community kitchen that we share in the community and serve a weekly meal out of, which happened right before you all arrived this evening. We served over 200 servings of spaghetti this afternoon. And we would love to continue to build, support, and share our space. So if you have events like this or others that you'd like to use our space, you can contact our amazing operations person, Casey Truba, in the back. She's got cards if you'd like them. And we are launching our first ever outward-facing fundraising campaign for Giving Tuesday. So I'm going to have Casey just share our very short video about that. Thank you for being here.
If we share it, you are not alone.
we are open to questions, and I can pass around the mic to anyone that has any questions, so everyone can hear. Feel free to raise your hand.
I'm disappointed that nobody talked about water and the data center. That's a big issue.
Thanks for raising that. While I'm an energy expert, I can assure you that water is something that a lot of people are working on. It's top of mind. And if you want to learn more, I'd recommend looking at the Alliance for the Great Lakes. They put out a really great report on water usage with data centers, and they're doing some great work on that. I would check that out.
And if you didn't get a chance to sign in when you came here, if you leave your name and email, we can send out all these resources after the fact, including where you can learn more about water, and how it can be impacted by data centers.
As far as energy prices go in the wholesale market, it seems like there's an easy legislative fix, which is to take a baseline from a few years ago before the massive data center construction started. And anything above that, you charge back to the data center customers if that is where the load is identified from. Doesn't seem like it's rocket science. And I think the companies are very glad to have these costs socialized. They have zero incentive to pay for this themselves. Why the heck wouldn't you pass it on to ordinary ratepayers to fund your data centers if you can? I mean, if Amazon pays zero in federal taxes, why wouldn't they shove the energy costs onto the rest of us as well? And I think on a state basis, I mean, would it be that hard to write a law and pass it that just says, the extra load, you guys pay for it?
Kirsten, Matt, or Lindsey or Rob?
Would it be that hard to, so,
If they try to choose the nail, it's a simple math problem.
yes.
I'm wrong.
There are no ongoing jobs there.
I think that, like you said, the big tech companies, of course, given the opportunity, will happily subsidize all those costs, and they are happy to go along with it. To your question, if it's difficult to pass a bill mandating that, I would say, unfortunately,
I didn't say, well, okay,
Yeah.
pass a bill, but I mean, write a bill and get some momentum behind it. We don't want our rates going up by 50% to power data centers.
yeah,
You know, I don't know what the heck AI is doing for me, not much.
I would completely agree.
Okay.
And I think where the problem began, I think what a lot of states, commissions, lawmakers are trying to do is are passing these rules right now, saying that any generation from here on out, any infrastructure, you're paying for it, like you pointed out. I think the challenge of why hasn't that happened yet is it happens so fast that a lot of folks didn't know that these options, like, they didn't realize until bills were already going up. And then people start to look around and say, why is my bill go up? And then they have to trace it back. I think the answer is it all happens so fast. But people are trying to make these bills, and they're trying to make these rules and machineries.
We have state representatives, maybe they could talk to some of us, I don't know. I mean, you've got a job to write laws and to help get them passed in the interest of your constituents. Tell me if I'm wrong.
It's not, I don't think my colleagues necessarily have a super direct role where they're a part of the competition or on the front lines of it. But do some people want data centers in their community because either they will bring jobs or they think they will bring jobs, and those jobs aren't just, like as we learned tonight, there's not that many jobs once it's built, but there are jobs that come with building it. And a lot of those jobs are union jobs, like through the IBEW, and unions have loud voices in Springfield. So there's that, but I want to your question, like, we're open to all ideas, and to what Carson said, when we were working on Surja during veto session, there were many times in our internal Democratic caucuses, I'm sure Rob did the same thing in the Senate, where people would be like, but data centers this, data centers that, and our leaders were like, we hear you, we're gonna tackle data centers in the spring. But to your point, that doesn't mean we sit around and do nothing until the spring. We can't, on a practical level, move a bill until the spring, but we can prep it and we can introduce it. And even if all signs point to your idea being a dead end, which it might be, it might not be, there's a value in putting it on paper and introducing it and seeing how people react so you can actually have the conversation. And I think all too often we don't ask the very simple question of, well, why not? Why can't we do this? What's the barrier? And sometimes putting the bill on paper and introducing it helps you ask that question.
Yeah, and I want to echo what Lindsey said, and it's a great idea, there's no doubt about it. In terms of like competition for data centers, you point out that it's, the jobs in building, but not a lot of jobs that remain after it's built. But there is one thing that remains after it's built, and that's value. And so they're not looking to build them in Winnetka, in Schaumburg, and in Chicago. They're looking to build these in areas that are really compressed in terms of their real estate taxes, and so they bring value. So yes, those local communities that are really suffering, their schools are not getting adequate funding for their education because they have this shrunk down real estate tax base. It brings in value. So there are people who do want that, right? But you're right, it gets into this sort of complicated thing, like who's got to pay for it? Now, at the risk of keeping everyone here till 11 o'clock, I won't go on to my long diatribe about the race to the bottom and the unfair situation we have in the state of Illinois in terms of the way we tax and pay for everything. I can criticize a lot. But the point is, I hear you, and I can assure you that we are fighting that, like, first and foremost, there are meetings that go on every week that are focused around using government to make our system more fair for people like us. And she and I are in each one of those meetings, okay? So we are fighting for you. And if you have a hard time sleeping, call me tonight. I promise, I will talk to you, you'll all right? So we have the next question. Sir, did you have a question?
I'm just curious, and nobody may have an answer on this one. When we talk about the Great Lakes Alliance, we talk about these giant companies that have a whole lot of money. Is there anything, whether it's on the public government side or nonprofit organizations, anybody can speak to us as a collective? I know Illinois, if I can step out of Illinois for a second, like all the states that are tied to the Great Lakes working collectively to find a solution here or share best practices. Is that happening at all? Can anybody speak to that?
Yeah, there's a lot of different groups all over the country that are.
There are a lot of different groups all over the country that are thinking about these issues, especially in PJM, since it's the largest grid operator in the country. So there are a lot of folks that are creating coalitions along PJM. But for example, even on a more local level, there are other hubs. Like there's a hub in Minnesota, there's a hub in Wisconsin, and we all share the Great Lakes. So we're working together to think about this kind of situation. Like hub Minnesota, for example, is fighting a data center in Minnesota that's 600 megawatts, which is like, I think roughly the equivalent of like 250,000 homes. So we're sharing resources constantly, meeting regularly to think about like legislative solutions to this and just ways that we can better intervene. So there are different ways. There are a lot of different groups that are impacted: water, energy, low-income advocates. There's a lot of different players in this space trying to work on this.
My question comes from the same way that like states will fight over a job or a company to be in their state with taxes. Can we like collectively as Great Lakes states hold the line? Once we determine what the line is.
I hope so. I think, like Carson was saying, this stuff is moving so quickly. It's like we're playing catch up, which is unfortunate, but that's just like AI has been exponential and the growth has been exponential. So we're playing catch up, but I think we're getting there. We're like close. We're here in this room talking about it. So I think it's just next year will be a telling year where we're going to be at.
I would just add that on the electricity side,
side, much like regional, talk about Great Lakes states, a lot of Midwest and Great Lakes states look to Illinois as the leader and the first to do something. So I think when we are able to get these data center solutions across the finish line, a lot of Midwest and Great Lakes states are going to look to Illinois and say, okay, Illinois passed that, let's try that here too. Historically, Illinois is sort of first.
Okay, we have time for one more question. I know the gentleman in the back has been waiting patiently.
How much weight are we assigning to the 2030, 2040 goals that these technology companies are creating? Even if they're made in good faith, there may just be vapor inside those boxes in 10 years. And I just want to see if those are financially backed promises, or to what degree are we making our plans around those plans?
I don't really know when it comes to the corporations themselves of what those obligations are. I think a lot of it is PR and like personal tech. Like it's PR for them, but where we're at now is okay. Now it's PR and there's accountability involved, where they have to maintain a good faith relationship with people and their customers that they serve. And there's a big piece of this that we're thinking about is okay, how do we hold these companies accountable to these goals? And I personally don't know if there's financial piece that there's accountability for.
I think if I can echo a source of my terror, is that those tech companies may be redefining the customers that they're serving, and that they may not be prioritizing residential and domestic consumers over extractive corporations outside of us. And so they may be making these promises with one hand and gambling on a different style of governance and oversight with the other.
I think that's what makes these rulemakings that are currently happening so important is we can't, my personal opinion is that I can't trust these corporations to uphold these goals that they stated. But that's why these rulemakings that are happening right now are so important. If we pass a bill where we set a law that requires us to bring our own energy, then we're forcing their hand. It's not up to them anymore. If you want to connect with this grid and use this infrastructure system, you have to do it. So that's what and the importance of the work that focusing on there.
Okay, everyone. I'm sure our advocates in LaPointe and Senator Martwick will be hanging around for a few minutes. So if you have any leftover questions, feel free to ask them. But we are going to clean up the space. Thank you so much for coming on a Thursday night to this event and learning more about how to get